They say dogs live in the moment, but not me. I remember everything, especially the day I barked in the middle of a crowded airport, and no one had told me to. I didn't hear danger. I smelled it. Fear, quiet, dirty, real. That was the day I broke a command and found a little boy the world had already forgotten. They say dogs live in the moment, that we don't carry memories the way humans do. But that's not true. Not for dogs like me. Not for a canine like me. My name is Shadow, and I remember everything. I remember that morning like a scar. The way the air inside Dallas-Fort Worth clung to my fur. The cold tile under my paws. The smell of suitcase wheels. Stale coffee. Too much perfume. People everywhere, but no one really looking at one another. Just heads down, screens lit up, earbuds in. That's how humans survive their own world, I guess, by tuning out. But I don't get to tune out. I listen. I watch. I smell. Rick, my handler, Officer Rick Morales, was walking me down Terminal B like we did every shift. Same patrol route, same leash, same routine. He kept his pace steady, hand loose on the grip. We'd been partners for 4 years. I trusted that grip more than the ground I walked on. But that day, something didn't fit. We passed a flight from Seattle. I sniffed a crying toddler, ignored the grease from a breakfast burrito. Normal. But then, I froze. It hit me low in the chest, tight and sharp, like the scent was reaching right under my ribs and pulling. It wasn't danger exactly. Not the metallic tang of a gun. Not the bitterness of drugs. It was fear. The kind of fear that doesn't scream. It hides. It curls in on itself. It smelled like wet leaves under a porch, like an old blanket soaked in tears. It was human fear, but small and trembling and silent. I stopped dead. Rick gave the leash a light tug. Shadow, heel. But I didn't move. Then I saw him. He was maybe 6 or 7, slouched beside a man in a pressed navy suit, holding a stuffed bear that looked older than me. Brown hair, cartoon t-shirt, eyes too wide and too quiet. That's when I barked. It wasn't a casual bark, not a, hey, someone dropped a sandwich bark. No, it was deep and sharp, loud enough to bounce off every wall in the terminal. People turned, heads lifted, suitcases stopped rolling. Rick looked at me like I'd lost my mind. I don't bark unless I mean it. I'm trained better than that. Shadow, he warned, voice low. Stay. I heard him, but I didn't stay. I pulled, hard. It caught him off guard. I surged forward, dragging him 2 steps before he steadied the leash. I planted myself between the man and the boy. That man, I didn't like the way he stood. Too still. Too polite. I looked up. He smiled, but it wasn't real. His eyes were empty. Hollow. Like a house that had been staged for photos but no one really lived in. Rick stepped up beside me. Excuse me, sir, do you mind stopping for a moment? The man adjusted his tie. Is there a problem, officer? His voice was smooth, flawless. Name's Gregory Blake. I'm flying to New York with my adopted son. Everything's in order. He handed over passports before Rick even asked. Too smooth, too ready. Rick flipped open the documents. I sat, still staring at the boy. He didn't look up, not once. Rick said, everything seems fine, but we're going to need to run a secondary check. Gregory didn't flinch. Of course, you're just doing your job. He smiled again, but the boy, he clutched the stuffed bear tighter, like it was the only thing holding him together, and I smelled it again. That fear, so heavy it soaked through his skin. We took them to the side hallway. Gregory walked ahead, boy in tow. He never touched the kid, never looked down, just strolled like he was escorting a briefcase. As they passed a mirrored wall, I saw it again, how the boy kept his eyes on the floor and the man kept his face turned forward. No connection, no bond, no love, Something was wrong. I stayed outside the inspection room, sat at the door, wouldn't move. 10 minutes, no sound. Then a beep came through the radio. Invalid child passport. Real name, Aiden Lewis. Reported missing 63 days ago, Butte, Montana. I let out a low growl. Rick came out pale. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. I felt it in his tension, in the air around him. Gregory was now in custody. Aiden hadn't said a word, not even a whisper. I watched him through the glass. He sat curled up in a chair like a folded napkin, tiny, silent. Then Lauren Greer, one of the younger officers, walked in. She crouched beside him, offered him water, then a piece of paper and some crayons. He looked at the crayons like he'd forgotten what they were. And then he drew. A dog, me, then a house. Then a man with cold eyes and square shoulders. Lauren asked, "Is this you?" He nodded. She pointed to the man. "Is that your daddy?" His grip on the crayon tightened, and finally, with a voice so soft I almost didn't hear it, he whispered, "No." You could have heard a pin drop in that room. And I felt something lift, like the room exhaled. I walked in. I didn't bark, didn't move fast. I just sat beside him, rested my snout on his small knee. For the first time, he looked at me and smiled. It wasn't wide, just a soft curl at the corner of his lips, but it was real. That moment, that's when I knew. I hadn't broken a command that day. I had followed something deeper, something that doesn't come from training. It comes from the heart. And this was just the beginning. You can tell a lot about someone by the way they look at a child, or how they don't. I've seen war veterans cry like babies when they're reunited with their kids at the terminal gates. I've seen exhausted mothers press their foreheads against their babies and breathe them in like oxygen. Even the most distracted fathers, lost in business calls and gate changes, still throw a glance, a hand on the shoulder, a quiet check-in. But that man, Gregory Blake, never looked at Aiden. Not once. Not on the walk to the interview room. Not when Rick opened the folder of documents. Not when Aiden drew the crayon portrait that split the silence in half. The way he stood, shoulders back, spine rigid. He reminded me more of a security escort than a father. Eyes forward, polite, but blank. Like he was carrying cargo. Fragile, yes. Precious, maybe. But not loved. I've spent my life watching people. Not just with my eyes, though I do that too. But with my nose, with my ears, with something deeper. You stay long enough around humans, you begin to notice the way lies smell. Not just the sweat, or pulse, or breath. Lies have a weight, a tightness in the air, like a storm coming. Rick sat across from Blake, the file open, hands steady. But I could smell the conflict in him. He hated this part. The part where everything looked legal on paper, but something still wasn't right. Rick always told me the truth doesn't always show up in ink. Sometimes it shows up in how fast someone answers a question, or whether a kid will drink the water you hand him. And Aiden, he still hadn't touched the bottle. "You adopted him in Arizona, you said?" Rick asked. Gregory smiled, the same rehearsed curve of lips. "Yes, sir. Temporary custody. The full process is still ongoing. But I've got a provisional letter from Maricopa County. You'll see it on page 4. Rick flipped through the folder. There it was. A seal. A signature. Looked real. Smelled. Like toner and paper. But nothing alive. Outside the room, Officer Lauren was still talking to Aiden. She'd gotten him to draw a second picture. This one was of a house. A small one. With snow on the roof. "Where's this, sweetie?" she asked gently. Aiden looked up, barely. Montana. Is that your home? He nodded. I stood in the doorway, watching both rooms at once. Lauren looked up at Rick through the glass, held up the drawing. Rick nodded slowly. We'll need to verify with the Montana registry, he said, standing up. Gregory shifted in his seat, but just slightly. I really hope we can move quickly. We've got a connecting flight to Newark at 2:15. Rick looked him straight in the eyes. You're not flying anywhere just yet. The shift was so subtle, I almost missed it. The tiniest hardening at the edges of Gregory's mouth. The way his fingers drummed once against the armrest, then stopped. No panic, just recalibration, like a machine reprogramming itself. Rick stepped out. I followed. He didn't say anything to me, but his hand brushed against the top of my head. I leaned into it. He picked up his phone, walking down the corridor to the airport's secure operations room. I stayed behind, sat just outside the room where Aiden was. I could see him through the glass. He was tracing the drawing with his finger now, slowly, almost like he was remembering, not just sketching. His hand rested gently on the stuffed bear's leg, like he was afraid it might disappear if he looked away. Lauren tried again. Do you know where your mom is, sweetheart? A long pause. Then Aiden whispered, Butte. Montana? He nodded. She told me, if I ever got lost, say I was looking for her. Lauren's throat tightened. I could smell the salt of it in her tears before they even fell. We had a name, a place, a direction. I stood and padded over to Aiden, nudging my head gently into his small side. He didn't flinch. He looked at me again, this time longer. And then he did something that hit me deeper than any command ever had. He leaned his forehead against mine. There was no camera in that moment, no press, no badge or paperwork, just me and a child trying to believe the world might still be safe. Later that hour, Interpol confirmed what we feared. Gregory Blake's documents were forged, not from Maricopa County, not from anywhere. Aiden Lewis had been declared missing 63 days ago. His mother, April, had reported it, again and again, but no one listened. She had no lawyer, no money, just a voice that nobody wanted to hear. Until I barked. When Rick came back, he was quieter than usual. He looked through the glass at Blake, now being escorted to a holding cell. Then he looked at Aiden, then me. He squatted down, put both hands on my cheeks, and looked me in the eyes. You knew, he whispered. You knew before any of us. I licked his nose. He smiled, for the first time that day. As evening fell, the light in the terminal shifted from harsh white to soft gold. Flight slowed. Families disappeared into Ubers and rental cars. But inside that quiet room, Aiden sat curled in a fleece blanket, his bear tucked under his arm. Lauren read him a picture book about a fox and a treehouse. And I laid at his feet, ears perked. Not because anyone told me to, but because he needed me there. And I don't leave the ones who need me. Not anymore. Humans put a lot of weight in names. They write them on birth certificates, etch them on dog tags, call them out in crowded airports, hoping for someone to answer. A name is supposed to mean something. To say, I am here. I belong somewhere. I matter. But that boy, he had a name, just not the one they gave him. And he had no voice. Not at first. After we confirmed his real identity, Aiden Lewis, 6 years old, missing from Butte, Montana, I watched the grown-ups scramble like ants around a broken nest. Phones rang. Reports printed. Someone from Child Protection showed up with a manila folder thick enough to be a novel. But Aiden, he stayed small and silent. It wasn't the kind of silence that kids use when they're shy. It wasn't even trauma's kind of silence. It was quieter than that. Deeper. Like he'd tucked his voice into a place so far down inside that even he couldn't reach it. I know that kind of quiet. I'd seen it once before, in a veteran who came home from Iraq and never barked orders at his dog again. Just sat by the window, staring into the light like he was afraid of it. Some silences aren't just about not speaking. They're about not being heard. Karen Wells was the name of the child specialist who came that evening. She looked young, but carried herself like someone who'd been through 1,000 hard stories and still believed the next one might end differently. She crouched beside Aiden, held out a juice box and a soft voice. "Hi there. I'm Karen. You mind if I sit here for a while?" Aiden didn't answer, didn't look up, she didn't push. Just sat on the floor beside him and started telling a story. Something about a bunny who got lost in a grocery store, got scared, got found. The words didn't matter as much as the rhythm. Her voice moved like water, soft, constant, not asking anything in return. I watched Aiden slowly uncurl from the blanket. His little hand reached for the juice box without a word. That was something. Not much, but something. Then Karen pulled out a bag of crayons and a stack of plain paper. "Sometimes when talking feels hard," she said, "drawing helps." She didn't hand him a picture to color in, just a blank sheet. That was important. Aiden stared at it for a while. The crayon in his hand wobbled, unsure. Then he pressed it down and began to move. Slowly, carefully, a shape started to take form. It was a dog, not just any dog. It was me. I recognized the way he drew the ears, straight up. The snout, broad and curved. Even the tail, low but not tucked. Calm, present. And then, next to me, he drew something else. A small house with a red roof, a mailbox, and a swing set. There was snow on the ground. I knew what that meant. Montana. Karen leaned in gently. "Is this your home?" Aiden gave the faintest nod. "Do you remember where it is?" He nodded again. Then he drew a third figure, a man, tall, with a square jaw and straight eyebrows, no smile. Just 2 small dots for eyes and a flat line for a mouth. Karen's voice was almost a whisper. "Is that your daddy?" Aiden didn't speak. He just stared at the paper for a long time. Then, almost too softly to catch, he said, "No." One word. It was like thunder in the quiet. Karen glanced at me, her eyes wet. I moved closer to Aiden and laid my head gently on his lap. He didn't flinch. Instead, he put his hand on top of my head and left it there, not gripping. Not clinging. Just resting. Like he knew I wasn't going anywhere. That night, while Rick and Karen worked late filling out forms and organizing the next steps, I stayed curled up beside Aiden. He had a small cot set up in the family center's quiet room, somewhere between a waiting lounge and a shelter. The lights were dimmed, the sounds were soft, but I could tell he wasn't asleep. He just stared at the ceiling. "I miss my mom," he whispered suddenly, voice cracking like he hadn't used it in weeks. I raised my head and looked at him. "She always knew when I was scared," he said, even when I didn't say anything. I licked his hand, slow and steady. He smiled, barely. "She said if I ever got lost, I should look for someone who listens with their heart." I didn't know how to explain it to him, but I wanted to bark. "That's what I do, kid. That's what I've always done." The next morning, Rick got the call. April Lewis, Aiden's mom, had been located. She'd never stopped looking. I reported him missing 3 times, went to the sheriff, the press, even the FBI. But no one believed her. Said maybe the father had taken him, or she'd forgotten where he went. Or she was just overwhelmed, like some mothers get. She didn't have a lawyer. She didn't have money. But she had a name. And now, she had a chance. Karen told Aiden gently, "Your mom's coming, sweetheart. She's flying here today." He didn't respond right away, just blinked a few times. Then he pulled the stuffed bear closer and said, "She'll bring my scarf. She always brings my scarf when I'm cold." Karen smiled. "I bet she will." The rest of that day moved slow and fast all at once. Rick was on edge, paperwork flying, phones ringing. Everyone trying to act calm but moving just a little too quickly. But I stayed with Aiden, always within reach, always in his eye line. That afternoon, while we sat near the window, Aiden turned to me and whispered, "Do you think she'll still remember me?" I barked once, soft, but firm. He smiled again. "She always said I looked like her. Same chin, same funny ears." He reached up and wiggled one of mine. I let him. I would have let him do anything in that moment, because deep down, I knew something most of the room didn't yet. That boy. He wasn't just a missing person. He was a piece of someone's heart that never stopped beating, and that heart was flying toward us at 38,000 feet. I've sniffed bombs under buses, caught the scent of fentanyl inside a fake suitcase, chased down a runner in an alley behind Terminal C who thought he could outpace a 4-legged veteran. But the most dangerous things I've ever smelled don't come from explosives or powder. They come from people. People who smile too easily, who never blink, who hold a child's hand like they're picking up groceries. I don't need a warrant to know something's wrong. I just need a moment, a whiff of the air, a glance at a reflection, and that man, Gregory Blake, he stank of control. That morning, while Aiden curled against my side in the quiet room, Rick paced between desks inside the operations hub. Officers moved like clockwork around him, checking databases, calling federal offices, trying to verify the stack of documents Gregory had presented like a magician pulling doves from a hat. Arizona custody forms, a signature from a county clerk, a medical affidavit about trauma-related mutism. It all looked good, crisp, laminated even. But every page was missing the one thing that matters most: truth. At first glance, everything matched. No glaring typos, no mismatched seals, not even a paperclip out of place. But Rick has good instincts, almost as good as mine. He called up Interpol and requested a sweep on Gregory's passport history, just to be sure. That's when it started to crack. Gregory had been to Luxembourg, then Dubai, then back to Texas, all within a window of 8 months. But no adoption agency tied to him, no immigration paperwork for a dependent child. "How the hell does a guy move a 6-year-old internationally without a trace?" Rick muttered, running a hand over his face. I stood beside his chair, ears twitching, eyes on the hallway. That's when I saw it. Through the glass wall of the observation room, Gregory sat with folded hands, calm, unbothered, not even glancing at the door. But his reflection, that's what caught me. He was watching the hallway, watching who came and went. Not the way someone nervous does, not panicked, measured, calculated, like a wolf pretending to sleep with one eye open. He wasn't just lying, he was hunting. Rick walked into the room, folder in hand, sat across from him. "We've got some inconsistencies, Mr. Blake." Gregory didn't flinch. "That's so." Rick tapped the folder with 2 fingers. For starters, this custody document. We called Maricopa County. They've never issued it. Not in the last year. Not ever. Gregory gave a polite smile. Then someone at the courthouse needs to update their records. Rick leaned in. Where did you get Aiden? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for the water on the table, took a slow sip, and set it down perfectly centered on the coaster. That boy has no one, he said finally. His mother is unstable. I've seen the kind. Unfit. Overwhelmed. She left him alone for hours. You just decided to take him. I gave him a future. Rick's jaw tightened. I saw it in the crease above his chin. You forged documents. You took a child across state lines. And now you're sitting here like this is a business meeting. Gregory stared at him for a long second, then said flatly, because emotion clouds judgment. And there it was. The mask slipped. He wasn't trying to pass as a parent. He never was. He was passing as a professional, a man who believed the world would give him a pass because he wore a nice jacket and knew how to speak softly. Back in the family center, Karen was folding up Aiden's drawings. She'd placed the one of the red-roofed house in a plastic sleeve. He told me that house has a swing on the back porch, she said to Rick. His mom used to make him cocoa after sledding down the hill in the backyard. He remembers that? Rick asked. He remembers the love, she said, even if he won't say the word. Later that afternoon, a call came through. April Lewis was en route. A connecting flight from Missoula had her arriving in Dallas before midnight. When we told Aiden, he didn't say anything. He just breathed out, like the air had been caught in his chest for weeks, and finally, just maybe, he could let some of it go. But me? I stayed alert, because Gregory Blake hadn't stopped watching the door. That evening, just before sundown, Rick and I escorted a federal agent back to the room where Gregory was held. He'd requested another opportunity to clarify. I could already feel it before we reached the door, the shift in temperature, like a snake tensing before a strike. As we stepped inside, Gregory's smile returned. I've spoken to my attorney, he began. You're making a mistake. Rick didn't respond. Just set a printed photo on the table. Aiden, smiling. Not recently, but months ago, before the disappearance. It was a school picture. Bowl cut, gap-toothed, freckles bright. Gregory glanced at it, just briefly. No recognition, Rick said. You never even learned how to fake that, did you? There was a silence in the room. Then Gregory said something I'll never forget. She never deserved him. That kid needs order, not chaos. I gave him a structure, a purpose. You think letting him draw with crayons and talk to mutts is going to fix that? I moved before I thought. A step forward, a growl low in my chest. Rick's hand dropped gently to my back. Not to stop me. Just a reminder. We know who he is now. I looked Gregory in the eyes. No bark. No flash of teeth. Just stillness. And for the first time since I met him, he looked away. That night, the hallway outside the family center was dark and quiet. Aiden slept on a fold-out cot under a blanket with faded rocket ships, his bear tucked under one arm. I lay by the door. Karen sat on the chair beside him, head tilted back, eyes closed. Rick leaned against the wall, holding a styrofoam cup of bad coffee. He almost got away with it, he said. I lifted my head. But you wouldn't let it go. Wouldn't listen when I said stay. He smiled down at me, tired and grateful. Good boy, he said softly. You were the only one paying attention. I thumped my tail once against the floor. Because I knew. In that moment, Aiden wasn't just found. He was seen, and that made all the difference. Humans talk about memory like it lives in the mind, but I've always believed it lives in scent. There's something about the way an old blanket holds on to the smell of a mother's hands, or how a stuffed toy, even half falling apart, can carry the warmth of a home long gone. I know this because that bear Aiden clutched wasn't just fabric. It was the last thread tying him to who he really was, and they tried to strip that from him. After Gregory was officially taken into federal custody, things moved quickly. The local task force handed over documents to the DOJ. April Lewis, Aiden's mother, was flying in under emergency order with escort from Child Protection Services. And Aiden kept drawing, mostly me. He'd draw me in front of houses, under trees, beside big red barns. He'd even started adding stars to the corners of the page, like he knew something bigger was watching over him. And every now and then, when he thought no one noticed, he'd smile while he worked. It was the kind of smile that only comes when a shadow starts to lift. That morning, Karen came in holding a package, small, taped up haphazardly. She crouched beside Aiden's cot. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "this came in with your mom's things. She asked us to give it to you early." Aiden sat up slowly. He looked from the box to Karen, then to me. Then he opened it. Inside was a scarf, knit, frayed at the edges, sky blue with 2 yellow stripes. It smelled like something I couldn't describe. Warmth, pine needles, the back seat of a family car on a road trip through Montana. It smelled like memory. Aiden pressed it to his face and didn't speak. He didn't have to. Karen said nothing, either. Just rubbed his back while he tucked the scarf under his bear's arm like a sleeping bag. Later, while Rick and the others reviewed court paperwork, I followed Aiden out to the small fenced garden behind the family center. The air was sharp with early spring chill, but sunlight broke through just enough to warm the flagstones. He didn't run or climb. He just stood there. Then he whispered, "My name's Aiden." I tilted my head, listening. "I told them it was Benji when they asked," he said. "Because that's what he called me." He was quiet a moment. "He told me I had to be Benji now, that my mom was gone, that the bear was all I had left, and if I talked too loud, the bad men would come." He turned to me. "But you didn't believe him, did you?" I walked over and sat beside him. "No one else barked," he said. "But you did." He touched my head gently, right between my ears. That quiet, careful pat that says more than any thank you ever could. I closed my eyes and leaned into it. That night, April's plane touched down. I wasn't in the terminal when she arrived. They didn't want to overwhelm Aiden. They kept him in a private room, dim lights, soft voices. Karen sat with him while Rick stood near the door. I was lying just outside, still and waiting, my chest warm against the floor tiles. Then the door creaked, and I heard it. A woman's breath breaking mid-step. "Aiden?" Her voice cracked like dry wood. He didn't speak, didn't even move. She stepped in slowly, her hand clutching the doorframe like she wasn't sure this was real. "Baby, it's me. Mama's here." Aiden looked up, eyes wide, frozen. He looked at me, then her. Then he ran. It wasn't graceful. His feet stumbled over the cot blanket. He knocked over a plastic water bottle. But none of it mattered. He threw himself into her arms with the force of 1,000 dreams that had been waiting to come true. She dropped to her knees and caught him,
holding him so tight I thought she'd never let go again. They stayed like that for a long time, neither speaking, just shaking in each other's arms. Rick watched from the hallway. Karen had her hand over her mouth, tears slipping through her fingers. And I walked in last. April looked up when she saw me. For a second she didn't say anything. Then, through tears and a smile that came from somewhere deeper than joy, she said, "You must be the one who brought him home." I wagged my tail once. "Because yes, ma'am, I was." Aiden tugged gently on her sleeve. "Mama, this is Shadow." She wiped her eyes, nodding. "Thank you, Shadow. Thank you for not letting them take him." That night, while Aiden slept curled in her arms, I lay at their feet. I don't know if they dreamed, but I know I did. Not of kennels or training courses or old tennis balls on airport tarmac. I dreamed of snow-covered roofs and cocoa steam and a blue scarf with yellow stripes. I dreamed of belonging. Because sometimes, even a dog needs to know they're exactly where they're meant to be. I've spent most of my working life standing, not sitting, waiting for commands, watching crowds, ears up, eyes moving, muscles tight. That's how I was trained. A canine doesn't sit unless told to. But that night, no one told me to sit. I just did. Right there, beside Aiden. The room was quiet. Just the hum of the overhead lights and the soft ticking of a wall clock that had probably been off by 5 minutes for years and no one cared to fix it. The kind of quiet that only happens after a storm. Not silence, but peace. Aiden was on the cot again. This time he wasn't curled in on himself like a question mark. He was stretched out, his little legs dangling over the edge, scarf bunched up beneath his chin, and that bear tucked close like it had finally done its job. And he smiled. It was small, soft, like a sunrise peeking up over a cold field. But I saw it, and I felt it. That smile wasn't just about seeing his mama again. It was trust. The kind that only grows back slowly, like moss after a fire. Rick came in around midnight. He was holding 2 cups of coffee, one of which he handed to Karen, who looked like she hadn't blinked in hours. "He's sleeping," she whispered, nodding toward Aiden. Rick crouched beside me, setting his cup on the floor, steam curling into the dim air. "You've been right here this whole time, huh, partner?" I licked my lips and looked up at him. He reached over and scratched behind my ear. "You did good." Funny thing is, when you're a dog, praise doesn't sound like medals or speeches or big words. It's in the tone, the hand on the head, the way someone breathes when they finally stop worrying. I closed my eyes for a second and let it sink in. Karen sat down on the edge of the cot, her voice low. "I spoke with April for a while. She's been through hell, Rick." I figured. She filed 3 missing persons reports. They kept saying it was a custody mix-up. That maybe she forgot who picked Aiden up from daycare. One officer asked if she'd been drinking. Rick exhaled hard. Jesus. She even mailed a letter to the state's attorney general. And? Karen shook her head. No one read it. We all sat there in the quiet. Rick finally stood. Well, someone's reading now. The next day, April was brought to a temporary safe housing unit nearby, part of a family reunification program. Nothing fancy, just a little place with clean sheets and good locks. But it was theirs, and Aiden knew it. He walked in holding her hand with one side and my leash with the other. They let me stay. Said it was temporary, but I knew better. I didn't wear my vest that day. No harness, no badge, just me. We set up a space in the living room. A dog bed, a bowl, a beat-up tennis ball someone found in the back of a staff closet. Aiden placed the ball in front of me with ceremony, like he was offering treasure. "Shadow," he said, his voice a little stronger now. "This is your home too." I sniffed the ball, then nudged it back toward him. He giggled. It was the first time I'd heard that sound from him, like water breaking through a dry dam. Later that afternoon, a social worker named Devon came by with some forms for April. He sat on the porch with her, while Aiden and I played in the yard. I didn't do tricks. I'm not that kind of dog. But I let him toss the ball, and I jogged to get it, tail wagging, just fast enough to make him proud. "You were always this good with kids?" Devon asked Rick. Rick chuckled. "He's better with them than most adults I know." "Think he'd adjust to family life?" Rick glanced at me. I caught his look, tail swaying low and slow. "He already has," Rick said. Inside, April was talking quietly with Karen. "He used to wake up in the middle of the night," she said. "Just screaming or silent, but wide-eyed, frozen." Karen nodded gently. "It's normal after trauma. But since Shadow came, he sleeps, feels safe." April looked down at her hands. "It's not just Aiden." Karen waited. "I do too." That night, Aiden crawled into bed without a word. He hugged his bear, pulled the scarf over his nose like it was a blanket, and reached a hand down over the side of the bed. I was already there. He didn't say goodnight. He didn't have to. His fingers found my ear, and for the first time in a long time, we both slept through the night. I've watched thousands of people hug, soldiers returning home, families saying goodbye at security checkpoints, lovers trying not to cry. Some hugs are quick, obligations really. Others are long but hollow, the kind where one person's eyes stay open. But every once in a while you witness one of those rare hugs, the kind that holds more than arms. It holds time, pain, hope, loss. It holds everything. Words can't carry. That was the kind of hug I saw between April and Aiden. It happened 2 mornings after they reunited. The sun was barely up, casting thin ribbons of light across the laminate floor of their temporary home. I was lying under the window, half dozing, when I heard soft footsteps padding across the room. Aiden, still in his pajamas, clutching his bear by one leg, scarf dragging behind him like a tail. He didn't say anything, just walked straight to his mother, who was sitting cross-legged on the couch in her robe, staring at nothing like most mothers do, when their minds are 10 miles deep in worry. He crawled into her lap without a word. She folded her arms around him so gently at first, I thought she was afraid he might vanish. Then tighter and tighter, like she was gathering back every day she had lost. I watched from my corner, not moving, not even blinking. Aiden buried his face in her chest. I could hear the sound, wet, shuddering, not quite crying, but more than breathing. April pressed her cheek to the top of his head, eyes closed, one hand on his back, the other tangled in his hair. They stayed that way for a long time, longer than most people would think to stay, like they both knew they'd run out of chances once and weren't about to let another slip through. Later that day, Rick came by to check on things. He had a clipboard in one hand and a small white envelope in the other. "Court papers," he said to April. "Official order transferring custody back to you, permanently." She blinked fast, nodding as she took the envelope. Her hands trembled just a little. "Thank you," she said, "for believing me, for not giving up." Rick looked over at me.
"Don't thank me," he said. "Thank the dog who didn't follow the order." April smiled. "Then thank you, Shadow." I gave her a soft nudge with my nose. That afternoon, the three of us, Aiden, April, and me, sat on the back steps of the little housing unit. The wind carried a smell of fresh mulch and cut grass. Aiden leaned against my side, while April sipped tea from a chipped mug. "I used to have nightmares," Aiden said softly, not looking up. "I know," April whispered, brushing his bangs from his forehead. "I dreamed I was in a glass box, and everyone walked by, but no one saw me." She nodded slowly. "That's how I felt too." Aiden reached over and took her hand. Just held it. Neither said a word after that. They didn't need to. The next morning, a team from the DOJ flew in to debrief Rick and Karen. Apparently, Gregory Blake's arrest had triggered a deeper investigation. Fraudulent custody paperwork, bribed court clerks. More kids, maybe. More families shattered like plates dropped on concrete. It was bigger than any of us knew. But for now, that was someone else's job. Mine was here, with them. That evening, Karen returned with a new pair of shoes for Aiden and a bag of books with titles like The Invisible String and What to Do When You Feel Too Much. April thanked her, and Karen paused at the door before leaving. "I used to be afraid this work wouldn't matter," she said quietly. "That the system would always win." April stepped closer. "But sometimes it doesn't." Karen nodded, eyes glinting. "Because sometimes the dog barks loud enough." That night, Aiden had trouble falling asleep. I could tell by the way he kept shifting, flipping his pillow, tugging at the scarf. I got up from my spot and padded over, curling beside the bed. He reached out a hand and found my ear again, like he always did. "Shadow?" he whispered. I blinked. "I don't think I'm afraid anymore." "Not really." His hand stilled. "But can you stay here anyway?" I rested my head on the edge of the bed. Of course I could. He drifted off a few minutes later, breathing slow, bear tucked under his chin, scar-free, fear-free, just a boy, sleeping beside his dog. I stayed right there until the sun came back, because that's what you do when someone's finally home. You stay. Some truths don't live on paper. They don't wear official seals or sit stamped behind glass in a courtroom. They live in quiet places, in trembling hands, in the way someone avoids your eyes, in the heaviness of what's not said. And sometimes, truth walks in on four legs and refuses to look away. That's how it happened with Gregory Blake. By the time the federal indictment came through, we'd already known the truth for days. But the system needs more than instinct. It needs proof. I suppose that's fair. Paper can be forged, but so can people. It's easier for humans to believe something when it's printed. Still, that doesn't make it right. That week, Rick and I returned to the station for what they called a debriefing. We sat in a grey-walled conference room with mismatched chairs and stale coffee, while agents from the Child Exploitation Task Force showed us charts and photos and timelines. I watched the screen as Gregory's name popped up beside shell companies, court clerks, and adoption agencies that weren't real. No priors, no flagged behaviors, just a trail of money and charm and paperwork. He'd done it before, twice, maybe more. One child hadn't been found yet. Another was recovered in Delaware, with no memory of their original name. I shifted in my seat, growling low. Rick put a hand on my back without looking. "You think we've got enough to charge him under federal kidnapping statutes?" someone asked. The lead agent,
A woman named Ruiz nodded. We've got him on false documents, conspiracy, interstate transportation of a minor, and obstruction. But what we really need— She trailed off, looking through the glass into the hallway— was courage. The kind no subpoena can force. Back at the safe house, April sat cross-legged on the living room floor, holding a small piece of paper in her hands. Aidan was at the table, drawing again. This time a scene with a large oak tree and a red swing hanging from one branch. I was lying near the kitchen doorway, listening to every breath in the room. April spoke softly, almost like she wasn't sure her voice was ready to carry it. I think I'm ready to testify. Karen, seated across from her, met her eyes. That would help more families than you know. April nodded slowly. They didn't believe me the first 3 times. Not the police, not the school, not even my own sister. But now, I have to make them hear me. Karen placed a hand over hers. You're stronger than you think. I'm not, April whispered. But he is. She looked toward Aidan. He wasn't listening. Or maybe he was. Either way, his little hand didn't stop moving across the page. That evening, I sat on the porch with Rick, watching the wind push clouds across the dimming sky. You ever wonder if it makes a difference? He asked me, not really expecting an answer. All the paperwork, the chasing, the barking, the waiting. I just blinked up at him. He took a sip of his coffee. Some days it feels like a drop in the ocean, but then, he smiled. You catch a scent, you follow it, and a kid gets his mom back. I nudged his knee. Yeah, he muttered. Maybe that's enough. A few days later, the hearing took place. The courtroom was packed. No cameras, no media. But every seat was filled. Agents, attorneys, advocates, even a few other mothers who'd walked similar roads. Gregory sat at the defense table, clean-shaven, gray suit, hands folded like a choir boy. I watched him from the hallway. They wouldn't let me in the room, not officially, but no one stopped me from lying near the entrance, ears up, listening. April took the stand. Her voice was even at first. My name is April Lewis. I am the mother of Aidan Lewis. She paused. I reported my son missing 63 days ago. I filed 3 separate reports. I made phone calls. I sent emails. I begged people to look. Her hands tightened around the edge of the witness stand. But no one did. A silence fell over the room. Not until a dog barked. Another pause. Not until someone listened. Her voice cracked, just a little. But she kept going. My son was taken from me. Not by violence. Not in the dark of night. But through paperwork. Through loopholes. Through the confidence of a man who knew the system would look the other way. And it did. She turned slightly, eyes searching the courtroom, until they landed on me in the hallway. And it would have kept looking away, if it weren't for Shadow. I didn't move, just met her gaze. He sat beside my son, when no one else saw the fear. He stayed with him when no one asked him to. And because he didn't walk away, I got my baby back. She stepped down after that, didn't wait for applause, didn't need it. The prosecutor stood next. He held up one of Aidan's drawings, the one with the oak tree. This child should never have been in that man's care, he said, and yet, somehow he was. This is not about one forged document. This is about a system that assumes charm equals character, wealth equals good intentions, and silence equals consent. He looked at Gregory. He thought he could own a child, but a child is not a possession. A child is not a passport. The room sat still. No coughs, no fidgeting, just that truth hanging in the air like church bells in fog. The verdict didn't take long. Guilty. Every charge. No bail. Remanded immediately. As they escorted Gregory out in cuffs, I stood and walked to the doorway. He glanced at me, just once. And for the first time, there was something behind those eyes. Not rage, not arrogance, but fear. Because deep down, even he knew. He hadn't been brought down by a badge or a lawyer. He'd been brought down by a dog who wouldn't sit still. That night, back at the safe house, Aiden drew a new picture. It was me, sitting on a porch, looking out over a wide open field. He showed it to April. "That's Shadow," he said proudly. She smiled. "What's he doing?" Aiden shrugged, waiting for whatever comes next. I wagged my tail, because he wasn't wrong, and I'd be ready. I don't think I was born special. I wasn't the fastest in my litter. My ears were too big for my head for a while. I failed my first agility trial because I stopped to comfort a crying toddler who'd wandered onto the course. Some handlers would have called that a flaw. Rick called it instinct. "That's what makes him good," he said, brushing dirt off my vest that day. "He doesn't just see commands. He sees people." He chose me because of that, not because I had the best bite. Not because I could clear a 5-foot fence on command, but because I noticed things others didn't. And that's what brought Aiden home. In the weeks after Gregory's conviction, things started to settle. The news moved on to another scandal. The court sealed some records. Reporters made their way back to whatever storm was next. But in that little 2-bedroom unit outside the city, something else was happening. Something quieter, but more lasting. A family was forming. It didn't happen all at once. April still checked the locks 3 times before bed. Aiden still jumped at loud noises. And I still kept my ears open at night, just in case. But there were signs. Laughter over burnt pancakes. Markers scattered across the kitchen floor. Aiden reading books aloud to his bear, and to me. I was retired officially during that stretch. Rick came by with a certificate in a manila folder and a bag of treats that smelled like turkey and victory. "You're free now, buddy," he said, ruffling my fur. I just looked at him. Free, sure, but I wasn't leaving. Later that afternoon, April asked him quietly, "So what happens now, with Shadow?" Rick glanced at me, then at her. "That's up to him." She hesitated. "I mean, is there a process? Do I apply to adopt him, or—" Rick shook his head. "He already picked you. Paperwork's just formality." Aiden hugged my neck so tightly that day I had to lean back to stay upright. "I told you," he whispered into my ear. "You're part of us now." Spring rolled in slow and green. The trees behind the house filled out again. Birds returned. Aiden's laugh grew louder. April began speaking at community meetings, telling her story not because it was easy, but because she didn't want anyone else to be silenced the way she had. Some nights, we'd all sit on the porch just before sunset. April with her tea. Aiden in his red hoodie. Me on the bottom step, breathing in the scent of earth and home. And one night, Rick came by with a gift, a photo album. He and April flipped through it while Aiden crawled onto my back like I was a mountain. There were pictures of the airport terminal. The bear. The scarf. One photo caught my attention. A still frame of Aiden, mid-run, arms outstretched. April collapsing to her knees, her mouth frozen in a silent scream of joy. "I didn't know they caught that," April whispered. Rick smiled. Officer Grant took it, said he couldn't help himself. They kept turning pages. Aiden and me playing in the yard, April braiding his hair, Karen and Aiden painting paper plates to look like planets. It wasn't perfect, but it was whole. As they reached the last page, there was one empty slot. A sticky note read, "For whatever comes next." I felt something shift in my chest. Rick stood and knelt beside me. He didn't say anything right away. Just looked into my eyes the way he used to after a long shift, when we were both bone-tired but still breathing. "You did more than I ever asked of you," he said. "You stayed when I said go. You barked when I told you to heel. And you gave that boy something none of us could." I rested my head against his knee. "I'll miss you, old friend," he whispered. "But I think you found where you're meant to be." He left that evening with one last pat and a crooked smile. And I stayed. Because I wanted to. Because I'd been chosen. Not just by Rick, but by a little boy who once sat in silence, too afraid to speak, and now chased butterflies with his mouth wide open in laughter. That night, Aiden curled up on the couch beside me with his bear, the scarf slung around both our shoulders. "You know what I think?" he murmured, eyelids heavy. I waited. "I think maybe you were always meant to find me." He tucked his face into my neck, and I believed him. I've worn a vest stitched with patches, a tag engraved with my number, and once even a medal shaped like a star. Humans like symbols. They carry weight. They remind people of what's been done. But that day, as I stood beneath the shade of a maple tree behind our little home, watching Aiden chase after a red rubber ball with his scarf flapping like a cape, I realized something I hadn't before. I didn't need to be honored. I just needed to stay close. It was a Sunday, warm enough for sandals and popsicles. The scent of cut grass lingered in the breeze. Birds darted low in the sky, and someone 2 yards over was grilling something that made Aiden giggle and say, "That smells like hot dogs, Shadow." I wagged my tail and trotted after him. No leash, no command, just instinct and belonging. April sat on the back step with a cup of tea balanced on her knee, her eyes following every move Aiden made. Sometimes they'd flash with worry, like she was still expecting him to vanish into thin air, but each time he turned back, smiling, she'd relax a little more. "I still don't believe this is real," she said quietly one afternoon while we all sat in the shade, Aiden drawing chalk animals on the walkway and narrating them aloud like a tiny zookeeper. "Some nights I wake up and I'm afraid I dreamt it all." I nudged her arm, just enough to tip her mug forward. She laughed and wiped her wrist. Okay, I'm awake. I get it." That same week, the Department of Justice sent a formal letter. I was to receive a Medal of Valor, not just for distinguished service, but for what they called extraordinary instinct and life-saving intervention beyond the scope of duty. April held the letter in one hand and looked down at me with the other scratching behind my ear. "What do you think, boy? Gonna wear a medal around the yard?" I tilted my head. She smiled. "Didn't think so." The ceremony was simple. Just a few officers, a modest crowd, a podium that was too tall for my liking. Aiden wore a button-down shirt that he kept tugging at and asked if he could bring his bear. No one said no. Rick gave the speech. He didn't write it down. "I trained with Shadow for 5 years," he said. "I thought I knew him. I thought I understood what he was capable of. But it turns out, he knew things I didn't, saw what I couldn't, and acted when I might have hesitated." His voice got quiet. "I've never known a better partner." There were claps. A photographer clicked a few shots.
I posed. Well, stood still, mostly. Aiden leaned into me the whole time, his little hand gripping the fur behind my collar, like it was the only thing tethering him to the earth. Afterward, someone handed April a folder. Inside were adoption papers, official now, stamped and signed. I was no longer property of the US government. I was a Lewis. That evening, April wrote my name in permanent marker on a ceramic bowl. Not just for food, she said, for good. Aiden decorated it with stickers. Dinosaurs, mostly. One crooked star. That night, I slept beneath his window. Not because anyone told me to, but because I wanted to hear the rhythm of his breath. I wanted to know he was still here, still safe, still whole. Sometimes in his sleep, he muttered pieces of dreams, names I didn't recognize, bits of fear left behind in the darker corners of his memory. When he did, I'd rise and nudge his blanket up to his chin. Not every scar is on the outside. In the morning, he'd wake and find me there. Shadow, he'd whisper, reaching down. You stayed again. Always, kid. Always. One afternoon, April took a photo of us out in the yard. Aiden mid-laugh, bear tucked under one arm. Me with my tongue out and tail swinging like a metronome. She framed it and set it near the front door. Aiden wrote a label for it in blue crayon. My dog, my best friend, my safe place. I don't think I'll ever top that. And I don't need to. Because some days, being brave looks like running into danger without hesitation. But most days, it looks like staying. Staying until the dreams go quiet. Until the silence fades. Until the child believes the world is safe again. Not because someone told him so, but because a dog curled up beside his bed and never once left. I've stood watch in airports, humming with voices, in alleyways thick with silence, outside courthouses where truth was on trial. I've stayed alert through wind, snow, and the quiet ache of night. But the sweetest watch I ever kept was the one beside Aiden's bed. No threat, no sirens, just the steady, rhythmic breathing of a child finally allowed to rest. It started as a habit. Those first few nights after the trial, he'd stir at odd hours, not from dreams exactly, but from that twitchy kind of sleep where the body hasn't quite decided it's safe to let go. Sometimes he'd sit up without knowing he had, eyes open, but far away. Sometimes he'd reach toward the door before remembering he didn't have to run anymore. So I stayed, tucked close under the window, head resting on my paws, ears tuned to every shift in his sheets. It wasn't vigilance that kept me there. It was love, a quiet promise that had no words, just presence. One night, after the courthouse was long behind us, I heard a whisper. Shadow? His voice, soft as a leaf, brushing the sill. I lifted my head. He rolled to the edge of the bed, hand outstretched, fingers dangling just above my fur. You're still here. I let out a low chuff, just enough to say, always. He slid his hand into my fur and didn't let go. We both fell asleep like that. April noticed, of course. She always did. She never made a big deal of it. She'd peek in with a cup of chamomile tea, pause at the door, smile, and walk away. Some nights, I'd hear her sigh. Not a sad sigh. The kind that lets a little more air into lungs that once forgot how to breathe freely. One afternoon, I watched from the porch as she clipped fresh laundry to the line. Aiden was in the yard with sidewalk chalk, narrating some heroic story between a rocket ship and a very brave dog that bore a striking resemblance to yours truly. April called over her shoulder.
He started asking about school again. I perked my ears. He says he wants to try, she continued, glancing my way. But only if you come too. The next day, we took a walk to the school grounds. It wasn't fancy. Just a one-story building with peeling blue paint and a playground that squeaked in the breeze. Aiden gripped my leash the whole time, holding it like a lifeline. I walked slow, steady, not pulling ahead, just matching his pace. When we reached the entrance, he stopped. There were other kids, laughing, yelling, darting around like birds in spring. Aiden shrank a little, that old uncertainty curling around his shoulders like a shadow. But I was already there. I nudged his elbow with my nose. "You think they'll like me?" he asked without looking at me. I licked his hand. He nodded. "Okay." We didn't stay long, just long enough for him to touch the swing set, look at a mural painted on the bricks and whisper, "Maybe I'll draw this later." Back home, he did, and he added something else. In the corner of the page, a small black figure sat beneath a tree, tongue out, tail curled, eyes watching the school door. "That's you," he told me. "I know," I thought. Time passed. School days began. Mornings grew busy with lunch bags and shoelaces and April saying, "Just one more bite before we go." I became part of the routine, always walking to the gate, always waiting at the end of the day. But nights still belonged to us. One evening, a storm rolled in. Thunder cracked like the sky had split, and wind slapped the shutters until they whimpered. Aiden crawled into bed, curled up, and said nothing. I moved to his side, pressed close, warm and steady. He put the scarf over both our shoulders and whispered, "They can be loud all they want out there, but in here, we've got our own quiet." I rested my head on his arm. He didn't flinch, didn't even move. He was already asleep, and I kept watch, as always, because sleep isn't just sleep. Not for kids like Aiden, not after what he went through. Sleep is permission. Sleep is trust. And every time he drifted off without fear, it meant something was healing. One night, April came in to check on him. She didn't turn on the light, just stood in the doorway, the silhouette of a mother who'd fought the world and gotten her son back. She walked over, crouched beside me, and stroked my fur. "I used to pray," she whispered, "that someone would see him. That someone would know." Her hand lingered behind my ears. "You knew." I didn't move, because I understood. Some prayers don't come in lightning or angels. Sometimes they come on 4 paws, with a wet nose and a will to disobey a command. Later that week, Aiden started writing stories in a little journal. Short ones, scattered ones, most of them about a boy and his dog, chasing shadows or hunting bad guys or flying in space. But one story caught my eye. He'd titled it in big, shaky letters, "The Dog Who Stayed When It Got Quiet." He read it to me aloud, voice proud, nose running just a little. "You saved me," he read, "because you heard me, even when I didn't make a sound." He closed the notebook, leaned against my shoulder and said, "I think that's your superpower." Maybe it is. Maybe all I ever needed to do was stay. Stay through the fear. Stay through the noise. Stay through the silence that came after. Because in the end, that's how the world changes for someone. Not through loud declarations, but through one quiet, breathing presence that never leaves their side. The morning was soft. That's the only way I know how to say it. Like the world had been ironed out overnight, smoothed quiet with sunlight that spilled in through the kitchen curtains in long golden stripes. April was at the stove, flipping pancakes. Aiden, cape over his shoulders, socks sliding on the tile, was pretending to be a superhero on a top-secret mission involving syrup. And I? I was right where I'd always wanted to be. There are days that come and go so fast you barely notice them. And then there are days like this one, where time slows just enough for you to see how far you've come. How many miles? How many nights? How many moments where the world could have gone one way and didn't? That Sunday wasn't remarkable to anyone else, but to us, it was everything. Later that afternoon, April stood at the front door in her best navy blazer, hair pulled back neat, her hands shaking only a little. She'd been invited to speak at a national forum for child protection advocates in D.C. First time she'd be on a stage since it all happened. Karen was flying with her. Aiden would stay home with a neighbor and me. "You okay with that, buddy?" she asked him, kneeling down. He nodded. "Shadow and me, we've got it." She smiled, kissed his forehead, then turned to me. "Watch him, okay?" I licked her wrist in reply. The flight left just past noon, and when that plane lifted off, I swear the wind sounded a little like her voice saying thank you. Aiden and I had the house to ourselves that day. We built a fort in the living room out of couch cushions and old blankets. We watched cartoons. He read me 2 chapters from a book about a dog who could fly. At bedtime, he left the hall light on, but only because he said it made the shadows look like mountains, and mountains are cool. He slept easy, didn't stir once. The next day, we watched April speak on TV. She stood at the podium, her voice steady but warm. She didn't tell every detail, just the ones that mattered. "I was alone," she said, "and I was afraid. But a dog barked, and someone listened. People didn't clap right away. They just sat with it. Then slowly, like rain starting on a dry roof, the room filled with sound. Real sound. Not politeness, but something deeper." April looked out across the audience, and even though we were 1,000 miles apart, I felt her eyes on me. "I'm not here just to say thank you," she said. "I'm here to remind you that listening saves lives, that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just stays, beside a bed, beneath a window, refusing to walk away." She paused. "A dog didn't just save my son. He saved me. Because when no one believed me, he did." That was the moment I knew. We hadn't just made it through something. We had rebuilt something. Days passed, then weeks. Spring stretched towards summer. Aiden planted a tomato seed in a plastic cup and checked it every morning like it was a treasure map. April bought a hammock and fell asleep in it twice. And me, I turned grey around the muzzle, slower on the stairs, but still present, still watching, still listening. One afternoon, the mail came with a letter from Texas. No return address, just a plain envelope, handwriting slanted and unsure. Inside was a single sentence. "You were right. He didn't belong to me. Thank you for stopping me." No signature. April read it once, folded it, and slid it into the back of her journal. She didn't mention it again. She didn't need to. Some ghosts leave quiet, others never do. But either way, we were no longer afraid. That summer, Aiden learned how to swim. April taught him. I barked from the edge of the community pool every time he kicked too far. The other parents thought it was cute. I knew better. He'd told me once, "If I go under and you bark, I'll know I can come back up." He trusted that. Trusted me. Fall brought school again, real school, new backpack, bright shoes, a class photo where he smiled with all his teeth. And when they asked the kids what they wanted to be when they grew up, Aiden didn't say astronaut or firefighter. He said, "Someone who notices when people are scared." His teacher asked, "Like a therapist?"
He shrugged. Or a dog. That night, he crawled into bed and looked at me for a long time. You think dogs go to heaven? I blinked slowly. I think heaven is where you get to stay with the people you love. So, if you're with me, we're already kinda there. He didn't wait for an answer. He just pulled the blanket up and closed his eyes. Years from now, maybe he'll forget the courtroom.
Maybe he won't remember every moment, every hallway, every folded paper in a manila file. But I hope he remembers the scarf, the bear, the silence broken by a single bark. I hope he remembers that when the world looked away, something four-legged and stubborn chose to stay. Sometimes that's all courage is. Not running into fire, not fighting monsters, just staying, when staying is the hardest thing to do. So if you ask me now, all these years later, what I'm most proud of, it wasn't the medal, or the mission, or even the moment I barked. It's that I stayed, and I would do it again, every single time. If you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or like no one would ever come for you, just type 1 in the comments. That's all. One little number, and I'll know. Because I've been there too. And sometimes, knowing someone else has is enough. If my story meant something to you, stick around. There are more stories to come. Some I lived, some I watched, and some I still carry in the quiet corners of my memory. So go ahead. Tap that subscribe button. Not for me. For every voice that deserves to be heard. And every silence that hides a truth. I'll be here. Waiting. Listening. Always.